sometimes we just have to sit in the swamp together, right? Like the swamp is disgusting and it's gross and nobody wants to be in the water, but sometimes we just have to sit in it and be like, we're here, we're in the swamp, and it's not a great place to be, but we're going to be here together.
Hola, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the FirstGen Healing podcast. We are doing a part 2 with Jose. As you mentioned to us in the last episode, like there's a version of empowerment that is kind of like, échale ganas, levántate, síguele, right? But I love that you
Mhm.
grounded it with, and you need something that like uplifts you and makes you feel good in that empowerment.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to hear more about that and what that means, and then go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you conceptualized this so beautifully, right? Like the Phoenix Empowered, the name itself, it talks about the fact that like can't expect people or ask people to rise up if they haven't been told that they even can, right? If we haven't opened the door and allowed people to dream of something, how do we expect them to move forward? And I
Yeah.
think without even knowing it, I was already operating from like a radical healing framework just from that idea of like we have to make
Mm,
people feel safe and feel heard and feel seen, and then encourage and uplift people in order to see
yeah.
change. And that's
Mm,
where the nonprofit comes from. And we share stories and we share experiences of various minoritized communities, and so we'll do things like share experiences in the Latina community, we'll share experiences in the Muslim community, in the trans and gender non-binary community, right? And we're constantly looking at how else can we tell these stories? How else can we uplift these voices to make sure that
mhm.
people are front and center in the mental health conversation? That we're not just saying people are more depressed because they're queer. No, people are more depressed and queer because of all of the things that are being experienced, and we have to actually talk about that. Name the thing, right? And so
Yeah.
that's where a lot of this work comes from. And
Yeah.
frankly, is grounded again in radical healing.
Yeah, it's more, it takes into consideration so much more than sometimes I think it's like at some point you had told me, traditionally it's like how can we address the symptom? How can we make whatever you're experiencing go away? When
Mm-hmm.
in reality, it's like, wait, where's the root of that? Because if we
Mm-hmm.
don't look at the root of that, then it's probably going to come back. And maybe the solution we're giving you today is going to work for a month, 2 months. But when that shifts, like it's not going to. So I love
Yeah.
that this is kind of like looking a little bit deeper beneath where maybe our healthcare system doesn't always look, or where maybe even those around us that are empowering us don't also look.
Yeah, absolutely. I always tell my clients regularly, like, I cannot work with you and support you if I don't know the context that you're living in, right? If I don't know your
Mm,
dreams, your hopes, your family relationships, your work relationships, like all of that is a part of you. And
yeah.
symptoms, distress, psychological pain shows up because people are just trying to make sense of the world. And so if I don't know
Mm,
what you want for yourself, how do we know where you want to go? I'm not going to be the all knowing expert that's going to tell you you have to live this way. I want you to decide that, right? And so I have to see
mhm.
context. I have to see how people want to move forward and what they're dreaming about. Like similar to our first episode, what are you dreaming about that you're not telling people because you're like, oh, I can't share that part of myself,
Mm,
right? It's like
yeah.
no, like let's dream together. Yeah.
Ooh, I love that because then you're addressing like what are the limits that you think are real for you, right?
Hmm.
Because even though as like let's say, is your title a therapist? Is that
Hmm.
okay? So even though maybe as a therapist you've worked through limiting beliefs, let's say, the person
Hmm.
that you're working with might not have, and so the possibilities you see for their life might not be real to them if their beliefs say otherwise, right? So I love
Totally.
that you're kind of saying you look at the context of that for them también.
Yeah. And I'm going to nerd here for a little bit because I always tell people like
Yeah.
I believe that I am a scholar, therapist, activist because I believe that all of these things have to be together, right? We have to do the scholarship to understand what's happening. We have to do the clinical work to accompany people, and we have to do the activism to make change. It all needs to happen
Mm,
together. And I will
mhm,
tell you that in that identity as a scholar, practitioner, activist, just a few
mhm,
years ago, 2020, I was questioning whether there was a space for me in the mental health space. I was
mm,
burned out. I was tired. I felt like people were asking me to come do talks about identity, but it started to feel like it was like a diversity factory. Like people just wanted to kind of
okay.
use me. And I was
Yeah.
feeling so drained, right? And so lost. And I always say the psychology of radical healing framework found me when I needed to find it. It was during that time that I heard about these psychologists and these healers and these scholars who all came together, people of color, and were like, no, no, let's talk about how people of color heal, because healing is different than
Mm.
coping. Coping is saying,
Mhm.
like, let's address the symptoms and feel better. And, like, we're going to cope with the fact that you're in distress. But healing is like, you're in distress because you're in a system that isn't working for you. How do we change the system so that you're just not coping through the pain and still in pain? You're just coping with it, right? Like, we want to actually
Yeah.
heal so that you're not in pain anymore. It's like, oh,
Right.
take Advil. You don't take Advil when you have a broken arm, right? You want to set the
Yeah.
arm, you want to heal it. And so there's a
Yes.
difference here. But
Yeah.
we
A
don't think about
huge
that
difference.
psychologically. Yeah.
Right. Not everyone does, and especially those that don't share your experiences sometimes, it's hard. I
Mm-hmm.
think like I've heard multiple times throughout in this podcast or with the people that I work with one on one. When you're working with someone that is like helping you through your journey, if they are super disconnected from the experience that you're having, the response, the feedback you're getting back is so disconnected and it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
resonate.
Mm-hmm.
And that could sometimes even add to the helplessness that you feel. If you already feel misunderstood, if you already feel like you're going through something really unique, and then the feedback you're
Absolutely.
getting is so disconnected from what you're feeling, it's like it's only como proving, the internalized thoughts and beliefs. So
Yeah.
this sounds like it's really powerful, to address it in such a different way.
Yeah.
And I would love if you can maybe walk us through, I know the framework includes different factors. So if you
Yeah.
can name them, I think that would be cool. And then we can go into like, how does that run up against what we're facing now, but we'll get into that in un ratito.
Yeah, I feel like if you listen to part one and you're listening to part two, you're getting more of like my nerdy side, which is so exciting. But
Yeah.
I love it. I could talk about it all day. The radical healing framework has five what we call anchors, right? Five components or ways that people engage in healing. One is critical consciousness, right? Becoming aware of systemic oppression and figuring out, what do I do with this awareness, right? Like, I'm aware of institutionalized racism. How does that play a role in my life? What are the ways in which I can or want to push back against racism in my life, or ableism, or whatever the ism is, right? That awareness that's part of the healing process. We talk about
Mhm.
how cultural authenticity and self-knowledge, right? Engaging in cultural practices, right? Connecting with ancestral wisdom, connecting with ancestral forms of healing. That's a part of healing. The Radical Healing Collective and members of the collective always talk about how, like, people were healing long before psychologists were around. We are not the end
Mhm.
all be all of healing. That
Okay,
cultural
yeah.
knowledge and cultural authenticity is so important. We also talk about like strength and resistance, right? And like remembering that you come from strength. We have been through fights before. We will always be going through fights, and we continue to be able to resist and to fight back. And like that is a part of healing too. And engaging in
Mm.
that is super important. We talk about
Mhm.
the importance of community as the fourth anchor, right? Like, we need people. We need to be around our people, our families. And, family to me is a loose term. Family is something you build, something you cultivate. And so being in your community is
Mhm.
important. And then the fifth anchor, and probably my favorite one, is radical hope. In an experience of pain, in an
Mm.
experience where the world is on fire and you're like, where the heck do I go? Can I envision a world where I deserve to live the life I want to live? Can I hope for
Mm.
the life I want to live? Because that's going to move me forward. And so we talk
Yeah.
about all of these pieces playing together to create healing in minoritized communities, right? Because I don't like
Mhm.
the word marginalized. We don't exist on the margins. We're placed on the margins of society. And so that
Mm.
minoritization that happens is painful, and we have to heal from that.
Yeah. And even, we're I think in a, como se dice, como era, I guess, where everyone
Mm,
is questioning everything. And I
mm,
even saw a video of saying like we need to stop calling ourselves minority. We're the majority, and like
mm.
there's a quote unquote
Yeah.
majority that is trying to make us the minority.
People are definitely talking about it, right? And even just saying like the global majority, because
Yeah.
people of color are the global majority. That is the truth.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's what they were referring to, and I was like, "Ooh, I love that," cuz yeah.
Yeah.
Um but anyway, so okay, I love that it has different anchors as you call them. And so when you I guess what would you want to talk about next? Like how that impacts how you work with someone, how that impacts how you view healing? Where do you want to take the conversation?
I mean, it's all connected, right? So for me as a therapist, my biggest goal is to understand your experience of the world and where you are and what you need, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
as you move towards the life you want to live, it may be that you need to have conversations about crappy things that have happened to you and trying to make sense of like, why did that happen? Why did my professor tell me that I'm not good enough? Or why did, so and so tell me that my hair looked a certain way and made fun of me for it? Like, sometimes we need to process the systemic experiences. Other times we may just need to be in community, right? And so as a therapist working with
Mm-hmm.
somebody on like, how do we build an affirming community? And to me,
Mm-hmm.
all of these components of healing are guided by the person in front of me. And the cool thing is like, we don't belong to one identity. We belong to so many different groups and different experiences and histories. And so getting to know the person, getting to know how their history has made how they see themselves. You talk a lot about like limiting beliefs and like the internal process, but that's
Mm-hmm.
guided by everything in our lives. Our whole life
Mm-hmm.
history guides who we are. And I think as a
Yeah.
therapist, I take that into account and think, okay, so what parts of that do we want to keep? And what parts are we like, you know what, you're not serving me. I'm going to let this go and move forward. And how do we
Yeah.
do that? I think is really important.
Got it. Okay. So it's kind of like guiding the approach or the conversations then that you have, which
Yeah.
I think is really beautiful too, because, yeah, maybe some practitioners kind of stick to an outline, let's say, and it's like, we're going to take you through A, B, and C, and that's kind of my process. But I
Mm.
love that this is more of a grounded approach where it's like, where do you need, what do you need to experience or talk through or not talk through? That will help you. And as you were speaking about, like, let's say healing and how that's always existed, and it doesn't always lead to, let's say, therapy, or it can, but it doesn't mean that there aren't other factors. I thought about like a temazcal that I did at some point last year. I did a
Mm.
temazcal where essentially it's like you go into this hut, where there's coals that are really hot and they pour them with water, and so it creates steam.
Mhm.
And I just think like it, as a person, as a human, it was actually really primal, and I feel like in that moment I needed that. I needed that
Mhm.
feeling of connection with like the earth and with others, and like just being in this dark space and allowing my senses to go beyond, like a screen, and like different things like that.
Mhm.
And it made me think about that. Like sometimes when we're navigating the healthcare system or mental health, a veces we since we have like a limited maybe view of what that can look like, right? What are the
Mhm.
solutions? It almost sounds like you guys expand that beyond, maybe like A, B, and C. Um,
Absolutely.
what have been some of the things that you've suggested or seen work for people that maybe surprised you, or that were like success stories for you, that brought in those considerations?
Yeah. You know, I'm one of many people doing this work, and I think what's always been surprising to me is seeing someone tap into their sense of identity, right? And I think a lot about how like we have a contemporary or present day community that we learn from, we lean on, we get support from, but we also have like a historical community. And so I've been thinking a lot lately about like ancestry and reminding people to think
Mm,
about their own history of the ways in which they've encountered really hard things and have gotten through it, whether or not it was in a way that maybe was the most helpful or not. You got through that really hard moment and you fought and fought and fought. And oftentimes with trauma, people get stuck in that space of like, I need to fight, I need to fight, I need to be on the defensive, I need to protect myself. And it's like this
mhm,
reactivity that happens, right? And so reminding folks like, you've worked really hard to get to this point. Now it's time for us to figure out what parts of you need to be nurtured. Where do you need support so that you're not having to fight alone all the time, where you can lean on other people? So I
mm,
think a lot about who are the people that we draw strength from, who are the people that we can lean on to say like, hey, I've got this right now. And I think as a therapist, I view my biggest gift in life to be able to be one of those people that's like, things are really crappy right now. Like, let me sit in it with you. We don't have the answer right now, but like, let me hold it with you and let's talk about how you've gotten to this point and the strength it took for you to get to this point is so important.
yeah. Ooh, okay. So even kind of like, I don't know why I thought of ancestors as like previous versions of yourself también,
Yeah,
that hold a lot of wisdom and that had your back in those moments.
I love
Um
that. Yeah.
yeah, cuz sometimes like ancestors, at least for me as a first gen, like it almost feels really far in the sense that like como que there's a cutoff when my parents immigrated here, and so
Hmm.
it almost feels like I can't always like put my hand back and be like, oh yeah, these are my ancestors. This is where I come from.
Yeah.
And so as you were talking, I was like, ooh, like there are previous versions of us también it's that had our back in those moments. Not perfectly, like you said, not exactly maybe
Mhm.
how they should have. But do you run up against people that have gone through more traditional therapist approaches and then need to kind of rewrite through this approach where like you get to help them with this framework?
Yeah, I'm trained in what we would call third wave therapeutic approaches, right? And so we think a lot about values and mindfulness. And so I'm trained in ACT and DBT primarily. Um, and those are forms of therapy. And then I see radical healing as something that can be added to any type of therapy, right? So, like, if you're in
Mm,
therapy with a practitioner, radical healing is about bringing in culture, bringing in context, bringing in systemic oppression, and talking about these things. And so, one
mhm,
of the things that has always struck me is that people will say things like, none of my other therapists have ever talked about like my experience of racism or have encouraged me to like go to temple or connect with, you know, traditional forms of medicine. There are some radical healing therapists who I've heard will start a group with like pouring water into the earth to nourish the earth again, and doing that
mm,
practice, right, from African tradition,
mhm,
for example, can be a way for people to feel connected to something bigger than themselves. And I think
mhm.
I said I love radical hope, and that connection gives us hope that we can have something else, right? When I think of, like you said, past versions of myself that had to fight, past versions of myself that had to work really hard, but also people like the civil rights movement. People with disabilities were crawling up the steps of the U.S. Capitol building because we
Wow.
didn't have access to things, and we're saying like we're gonna exist. And so there are moments where the world feels really heavy, and I think of those people crawling up the steps of the Capitol building, and I'm like, you know what? I'm crawling up the steps too. Like, that's what we're doing right
Mm,
now. And so I
mhm.
think there is something to be said about stepping into the ancestral power, stepping into where we come from and who we are, and using that as hope for the future.
Yeah,
I get
okay.
fired up. I'm sorry. I'm all into this. I love it.
No, I love it. And I think, we've tapped into, as you call it, like your nerdy side. Let's tap into that activist side, like let's talk
Yeah.
about that because obviously we're not blind to what is happening in the world, but in our country también.
Yeah.
And I think, we talked in part one how I think we're both empathetic. We see other people's pain. We're all, clearly we feel like called, right, to this work for that purpose. But I imagine, or at least for me, the more that I see it, it almost feels like I'm constantly having to ground back into that purpose because it does feel harder and harder to tap into the hope.
Mm,
So maybe touching on different things, right? Pero like
yeah.
activism, systemic oppression, and then how do you keep the hope? Maybe we can go in that order or however it
Yeah.
flows through for you. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's all connected. I think you're so right, though. I'm going to be nerdy for one more second to connect us to
Yeah.
activism. As a scholar, in my PhD program, I study identity-based violence, and I specifically look at how people
Mm,
who share identities with people who are targeted, so Latine people, queer people, people at the intersection, both queer and Latine, how do people experience the witnessing of violence that, by the way, we have decades and decades of research that says that's also trauma. People have trauma
yeah.
symptoms, witnessing violence over and over, even if it's not
Yeah.
happening to you, right? Even if it's happening to people in your community. I mean, my research has consistently shown that people have reactions. And so,
Mm-hmm.
in thinking about that, right, and thinking about the fact that we are witnessing pain, it's so important for it not to stop there. We can't just witness it and be like, well, things are happening and that sucks. We can't just turn away. It's like things are happening, and then asking yourself, what is the one thing I can do right now to support the people in my community, to move for justice and change? I think typically what we see is we see people doom scroll, right? They're on like the
Yeah.
Instagram or TikTok or whatever platform being like, oh, things are horrible, things are horrible. that's not
Yeah.
helping you. Like, we have to acknowledge things are horrible
Mm.
and then say, okay, what am I going to do with this information? Because it's also
Mhm.
not enough to just be like, oh, that really sucks. Like, that doesn't get us anywhere. Of course, you're not going to feel hopeful, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so turning
So
towards like, what is the thing you can do?
mhm. So it almost seems like action also allows you to tap into hope. Would you say that it's
I
connected in
think
that way?
so. I think so. I think acting and being supported while acting can be really hopeful, right? And so being
Okay.
like, oh, things are really hard right now. Maybe you're going to be the person who marches in the streets, or maybe you're going to be the person who volunteers at a food pantry to provide access to people, who need food, or maybe you're going to be the person who calls your local legislator, or you're going to be the person who just reaches out to your neighbor and says, hey, things are really tough right now. Do you want to have dinner together and be in community, right? There are
Mm.
many actions we can take to heal. And I think those actions, those small actions, are where we find the
Mhm.
hope. It's like, oh, not everything is lost.
Mm.
I can do this one
Mhm.
thing. I can call my friend or my mother and just say, I love you. Like, these things are resistance to the pain that is happening in the world.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, and I love that you put out all of those different examples because it does sometimes seem like activism requires a certain personality or a certain, a strong
Mm,
characteristics, but it's so cool that to think like, no, actually, you can play a part in having dinner with a neighbor that maybe is struggling, or even like vocalizing, in that dinner you might end up talking about the things, and holding space for those thoughts and emotions already is shifting something within them that may be pouring into their cup enough for them to be able to pour into someone else's tomorrow. So that's so
absolutely.
beautiful to think about.
Yeah,
Mm,
absolutely.
yeah.
Before every talk I do, I say to myself, may these words find the person who needs to hear them. I don't script my talks. I don't script this kind of conversation. I think that some of the most powerful activism is just you being you. You showing up
Mm,
and you letting people see you. That is activism. That is healing, to be like, this is my full personhood and I want to share this with you. It doesn't matter if you're doing
yeah.
it, in Congress or on a stage or wherever you're doing it. Your fullness matters, and you allowing people to be in their fullness is healing and is activism. And so there are so many ways to make movement happen.
Yeah, definitely. It also makes me think of like my fullness, let's say. The last couple of weeks I had such a hard time recording, like putting
Mm,
my because I'm on TikTok the majority of the time, and I actually feel like I've built a community there that I really love and appreciate. And I like just put this b-roll type video where it's just like like of not my face, and I put text on there, and I was like, hey guys, like I miss you guys, but I can't, I haven't been able to use my voice. It
mhm.
like it's my throat feels super shut. And it
Yeah.
was actually beautiful because then the response there was like, this is you using your voice. Like you sharing this with us is a reminder that we are going through it, that we are struggling, or like, that, or it reflects back to us what we're feeling. And I was just like, wow, like such a beautiful
Mhm.
lesson there, that even in the moments where it's like, oh, but this isn't enough, like, no, actually it is in this moment, and it's
Yeah.
okay.
Sometimes we just have to sit in the swamp together, right? Like, the swamp is disgusting and it's gross and nobody wants to be in the water. But sometimes we just have to sit in it and be like, we're here, we're in the swamp, and it's not a great place to be, but we're going to be here together.
Yeah, naming the swamp.
Mhm. Absolutely.
We're definitely in a swamp, Jose, pero
Ain't that the truth? And it's scary, right? It feels scary to use your
yeah,
voice, but I also think that those of us with platforms, like, we have to. There's no choice.
yeah,
Like, I cannot call myself a healer and stay silent. That's not healing. That
right,
would be so disrespectful to the people who have entrusted me with their stories, who have
yeah,
entrusted me with their experiences. I refuse to let that be silenced.
yeah. And I almost see it as such a gift. I mean, I don't think we're unique, but I do think that like this path of finding yourself, of feeling worthy of using your voice, of taking up space, it shifts the way that we experience this trauma, and
Mm,
it does hold us back, or it can momentarily, but we also have the tools now to like get back up. And I think that makes such a difference. And
mm,
I love that people like you and I, we believe in sharing those tools with others, because then I don't know, at least I've seen it in my own, let's say, circle of people where sí está de la chingada lo que está pasando. You know, it's like
Mm-hmm.
disgusting, awful, horrible, and we have the tools to like know, okay, I need a moment for myself. I need to doom scroll today, but tomorrow, you know, I'm gonna do this meditation. Let's say I'm gonna create the headspace to be able to reset and then go back at it again. You know, whatever that looks like and means for me. So
Mm-hmm.
I think like I've seen how that changes the way we experience what we need to experience or see or witness, you know, because it's kind of like an ocean, you know, like the people around me. It's like, no, I'm drowning today. And someone else is like, hey, I got a floaty. And, you know, and it's
Mm-hmm.
just kind of like
Mm-hmm.
this. And it's
Yeah.
so cool because I'm like, oof, I needed a floaty today, you know, and then the
Seriously.
next day. So, and I hope like podcasts like this and yours create that for people también, you know, as we navigate this. Of course, I wish that and I guess I'm just externalizing my thoughts. I hope that's okay with you, but
I love
I
it.
yeah, I've been feeling really silent también, and so it feels good to talk about it and release and understand like there is purpose to what we do. It's not
Yeah.
solving the problems, but it is like creating a ripple that maybe it's not loud, you know, but it has like an impact, you know.
It's gonna meet the people that need to see it, right? And
Yeah.
I love this, and I feel like we're having un cafecito amongst friends, and so
Yeah.
I just want to also name that like it's heavy, and I
Yeah.
am sure that there are people out there listening who also have felt like, gosh, the weight of the world feels like it's on our shoulders, like it's up to all of us to like do the work, and you're right, it almost feels like you can't stop because if you stop, like people are suffering, and I think what you said about like being like I need to check out is so important. I've been telling my clients like there's no need to be checking social media more than once or twice a day. There's
Mm,
no need to be focusing so much energy on giving to everybody else to the point where you lose yourself. You need to recharge, or you're not going to be good to do the work. And
yeah.
I just think it's okay to be tired. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to be angry. Like that's just the
Yeah.
reality of where we're at in the world. And to come
Yeah.
together and just have real conversations about like this is so hard and so painful and we're in it together, but we're going to do it. And, again, thinking about our ancestors, whether that's ourselves or other people, we've gone through hard things and we've done
Yeah.
that and gotten through that. We can do hard things. We will do hard things. But the magic here is doing it together so that we're not all
Yeah.
exhausted by the end.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I remember that, but there have been moments where like the anger that you mentioned where I just get angry that it almost feels, I know this isn't real, but it almost feels like a certain group of people, aka los güeros, you know,
Mm.
don't collectively have to constantly go through these types of moments, you
It's
know?
true. Yep.
It almost feels like really frustrating, like how is it, and I know maybe it's part of the illusion, you know, because it's not as black and white, but it almost feels like porque why do we once again have to stomach this kind of stuff or process it and alchemize it within ourselves, like
Hmm.
it's their turn, you know, that's what it feels
Hmm.
like. It's just like
Yeah.
at what point is it their turn, because it's exhausting that like our parents had to go through so much, put their bodies at in the back burner, like no days off. Then I feel like I've done a lot of healing around that, like okay, I'm going to take my body into consideration and my mental health, and you know, this is the privilege. And then like it almost feels like once again survival mode takes precedence, you know, and once
Yeah.
again like all of that needs to get out the door, go out the door, because it's primal stuff right now. And it's just like
Yeah.
whew, like yeah, it's a lot.
It definitely is. And, this is making me think, and I haven't talked about this yet, at least not on a podcast, but I talk about it with my friends. I'm traveling around and talking about identity and mental health. And there is this sort of tension, right? Because people will say, like, why do we need to talk about this? You're creating division. I've heard it all, right? You hear it all. The,
Mm,
the, the people say things, and you
right.
just kind of sit with, like, well, no, actually, it's not about me painting anybody to be a villain or anybody to be a hero. It's me naming that people have different experiences. But the thing that I
Mm,
think humans do, right? We get so caught up in the like us and them. Their experience is different from mine,
mm,
so I can never understand it. And as a therapist, I'm going to call BS on that, right? Because like there are universal human experiences that we all can experience. We all know what
yeah.
it's like to feel pain. We all know what it's like to feel joy. This is just we are expressing, we are sharing how joy and pain look for us, how hope looks for us, how rejection looks for us. And if you tap
Mhm.
in and reflect with yourself, every single person, every single being on this earth can recognize that, like, we want to be loved and affirmed, and we want to feel supported and safe. I don't think
Yeah.
any of us really would question that in the reality, but we're so caught up with thinking about our own needs and not thinking about how the other person has that need. And so I think we have to think about the fact that, like, difference is just a different version of the same pain. And we have to
Mm,
acknowledge where we haven't had to experience these things, where we've had the privilege, right, of not having to maybe worry about walking out your front door. But the reality is there are people there, your neighbors are worried about that. And can you empathize with that? Can we teach
right.
empathy? I don't know. I've been
Yeah.
wondering about all that.
Yeah. I hope so.
I
It
sure
almost
hope so
seems like they don't
too.
want us to. It almost like yeah, and it's a little bit crazy to witness that, right? Like how empathy and like considering others can be labeled something bad in some way and marketed in
Yeah.
some way where like it's like wow, I didn't know, it almost to be like weaponized and it
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Listen,
interesting.
if we're going to be considered radical for loving other people and affirming other people, then consider me radical, because
Yeah.
how do you live in a world where you can't think about other people? It's just, that's wild to me. Yeah.
Super. See. I think I see it as like a lack of zooming out. Like you're very
Caught
como
up.
in a lot of conditioning, a
Mm,
lot of conditioning. I think I try to make it a point as when I speak with others like to empower them to empower themselves or like empower them to question things for themselves. It almost feels like some of the systems put in place right now that are working or quote unquote thriving is what it seems like is because it's like no, look at me, I'm doing things right, you need to listen to me. It's kind of like this conditioning that doesn't
right.
allow people to question. I don't know, I went on a tangent, my apologies. I don't I don't
Yeah, but
know.
it's the sort of privilege of being caught up in your own experience and not having to
There
put
you go.
yourself in other people's shoes, right? And the
Yeah.
sort of blindness that comes with that. That can be
Yeah,
really painful.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And it allows you to kind of perpetuate that as you go. Pero I'm thankful for
absolutely.
people like you and I and others listening, or to those listening. Thank you guys for listen. I mean, I think even if you're listening, if you listen to this podcast, it's you're someone who opens up to other people's experiences. And I always say like every story on here is so different, but there's a connecting thread throughout every single one. And I think that that is the beauty of listening to other people, to other stories, opening your mind
Right.
up beyond your experience. So thank you everyone for being here and for having that as one of your values, something that or having capacity pues for that, because that
Yeah.
is clearly so important. Yeah.
Being willing to do that. Thank you for creating that space for us too.
Yeah. Oh, yes. So before I let you go, Jose, as we wrap up this part two, please feel free to share también where people can find you, your work, maybe what your offers are right now, your services.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, we'll close today's conversation off.
Yeah, you can find us at the Phoenix Empowered across all platforms. I also travel and do talks and consultation about identity and mental health and radical healing. You can always reach out to our team if that's something that you feel like you need or want in your space, in your community. And if you want to just kind of keep up with what we're doing, I would say listen to our podcast and our new and improved podcast called The Phoenix Unbound, because we are rising and we are telling stories and we are not going to let ourselves be limited. And
Mm,
I look forward to connecting with people and to hear how maybe the work can continue to move forward. So I'm
mhm.
open to feedback for sure.
Beautiful. Okay, you guys, and you can find his information in the description of the episode. But yeah, thank you so much for tuning into part two. Thank you, Jose, for being up for it. And we hope that this was helpful, that it also maybe gave you insight into how you can look at your own healing, your own awakening, and broaden it beyond maybe, let's say, one to ones or speaking about what happened. Like, there's so much more to it that you can consider that can help you create a more enriched experience. So I love that. Yeah.
Absolutely.